Welcome to the Tepper School of Business Multimedia Series. For more information on the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, please visit us at www.tepper.cmu.edu/multimedia. And now, here's your selected video.
It's my pleasure today to introduce the speaker for today's session. He metaphorically sat where you're sitting about 35 years ago. So you want to hear what he has to say, but you also want to hear about his career, because it's a remarkable career. He's been lots of places and done many interesting things. He left here, I think, to go to Ford Motor Company. After Ford Motor Company, he moved to Booz Allen, where he spent the years from the 1960s into the 1990s working at Booz Allen, and ended up being president, vice chairman, chairman. He had many interesting assignments in Brazil, in Paris, two places where I've also been, which are really great places to be. I mean, he got good assignments. And then he went on to, well, let me say first, the years when I first came to CMU, the first dean of Tepper, wanted to train generalists. That is, he wanted to train people who could do most anything. And the idea was that we could teach management as a science that people could use because they had general principles. Well, not many people are able to do that, but Cy did that. He then ran Chiquita Banana. You know, we learned, I think, in the consulting business that he could do many different things. He not only ran Chiquita Banana, he ran it from near bankruptcy to struggling survival, and then to survival. And finally, what one would have to regard today as a real challenge, he took on, became the CEO and publisher of the Sun-Times Media Group that published papers. That's a real challenge today, and he left it when the Sun-Times Media Group was still standing, which is an achievement these days. So he served as a director of that company since October 2005, and he left in February 2009. With more than 35 years of consulting experience, Cy managed more than 200 client engagements in strategic planning, organization, marketing, finance, and control, and information systems. He was a generalist. He has worked for numerous industrial, financial, government, and nonprofit organizations, and has consulted with corporations in over 15 countries throughout the world. Cy is a highly sought speaker and is the author of a book, The $1 Trillion Enterprise, How the Alliance Revolution Will Transform Global Business, published in 2001. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome back Cyrus Freidheim, who I knew as a student many years ago.
Thank you, Alan. He was just as tough, just as smart, and just as outrageous back in those days as he is today. So Alan Meltzer, fortunately, has not changed. He's just gotten better, and his voice gets more powerful over the years. Well, it's great to be back to these halls, although I will say that we had a different one than you have here. I wasn't sitting, we didn't have anything quite like this at that time. Is my microphone on okay?
Yes.
Okay. But it took me, frankly, years to understand the real impact of it all. As I go think back on my time with this, sounds like it's there. On my time here, I think of some of the great minds that of probably the last 100 years that have walked these halls and that have worked with the students. People like Alan Meltzer, Simon and Cooper and Merton Miller and Hal Levitt and Leland Hazard and Dick Seyert, and of course my own classmate Ollie Williamson, who we didn't have any idea had this kind of potential, but you never know it when you are sitting next to the guy like you're sitting next to today, that sometime in the future he's going to be a Nobel laureate of in economics. Tepper has meant a lot to me over the years, and as I've progressed in my career, and I might just list a few of the things. Number one, analytical edge. I don't think that I had to take second place to anybody throughout my career with what I learned here about analytical capability and deep problem solving, getting into the guts of it and finding out what makes it tick. I learned that here, and it's stuck with me from my first job through the last assignment that I've had. And when I came here, like I think a lot of you, I had no business background at all. I had been to an engineering school, an undergrad, chemical engineering, and then I went into the Navy, and I said, really what I'd like to do is I'd like to do something in business. I didn't have a family tradition of business, so I had no idea what it was all about, what people did when they were in so-called business. But it seemed like the cool guys were all there, and they wore the best suits, and so I thought, this is really what I'd like to do too. So I learned that here. It transitioned me from being this smart young kid to being somebody that understood a bit of what was going around in the world and how to handle it. I gained friends through life. One of my partners at Booz Allen, who's a very close friend, was also here. We had something like 20% of our class, now we only had 35, but 20% of our class eventually wound up as partners of Booz Allen. So we kind of dominated the firm for some period of time. And finally, I gained a level of confidence in myself that I simply didn't have before. I played basketball and got when I was a kid and got confidence through that. But here I got intellectual and personal confidence that I could do things that were really important in the world. As Alan thumbnailed, my career has been about 50 years long, and it's been, to me, beyond anything I would have imagined. He mentioned I started off at Ford Motor Company. That was in the days where the leaders of the company were the old whiz kids. I spent 35 years at Booz Allen in Hamilton, and it was just an extraordinary 35 years living in the United States and Brazil and France and back to the United States, dealing with many of the corporations. And during the course of all those years, I spent a lot of my time outside the United States, but dealt with some of the leaders in both the world and certainly the world of business. And then I retired, and all of a sudden, to my surprise, had a completely different career, and that was as a CEO of two different companies, the Chiquita and Sun-Times Media Group, and I'll talk a little bit about them. In the process, I was on have been on 8 publicly held, publicly traded company boards, and 6 private company boards, and a whole bunch, probably about a dozen not-for-profit boards, a couple of which I chaired and a couple more vice chair. So I've had a full and enriched experience, and I frankly never could have imagined that I'd have such a fascinating and frankly fulfilling career when I came to Pittsburgh just 49 years ago. And it's been a hell of a run. Well, the core of what I want to talk about is challenges. And these are not necessarily crises, but these are things that I picked out over various parts of my career that I think have some underlying lessons, and I've called them my 4 big challenges. And the first that I'll talk about is Chrysler Corporation in 1979. Chrysler at that point was heading into bankruptcy and had requested a government bailout. The Secretary of the Treasury was working at the behest of the President, Jimmy Carter, who was about to face an election that was going to be a real challenge, he knew, and the last thing he wanted was 100 and some thousand people out of work at Chrysler because of their bankruptcy. So he was motivated to help. So what the Secretary of the Treasury told the board to go get Booz Allen and have them come in along with Salomon Brothers and figure out whether you've got a decent plan so we, the government, can responsibly back it and fund you through this rough period, i.e. a first major bailout. Well, we went in there, and to probably nobody's surprise, there was no plan. They had a budget, they had a capital plan, they had a product plan, they had all kinds of stuff, but they didn't have anything that said, we're sinking and how do we save ourselves? There was nothing like that. So the board then told us, okay, develop one. And oh, by the way, you have 2 weeks. And I mean, the company was truly sinking fast. So we went to work on it, which was, was a ridiculous request, but that was what we specialized in. And so, but we wound up with a major battle with management. We came up with draconian measures that we thought were necessary to put the company back into a viable position, both from a cash flow point of view as well as for their future. And after that battle with management, where they just tried to rip us apart, we went home. And we were home for a couple of weeks, and I got a phone call from one of the board members, Richardson Dilworth, who said, we have a special meeting that has been called by the Secretary of the Treasury of our board, and we want to present the plan at that board meeting, and we'd like you there. And I said, what plan? And he said, I'll send it to you. Well, I don't think I ever got it. But in any case, at that board meeting, which was in a gigantic room in the Treasury Department, and they had the whole Chrysler board there. They had half the U.S. Treasury group. There were a couple of Congress people, and there were a couple of people from Booz Allen and a couple of people from Salomon Brothers. And so they gave the job. They said, well, the chairman of the board, whose name was Ricardo at the time, said, would you present the plan? Well, he was almost comatose. This guy was, if they didn't get him out of there fast, he was going to die on the spot. And so Iacocca, who was the #2 in command, had just come over from Ford not too long before that with the idea that he'd eventually become CEO, but not for a while. And so he said, no, he wouldn't present it. And so they gave the plan they then pushed it over, and poor Dick Dilworth, who was, I think he was the office manager for the Rockefeller Foundation or something like that. Wonderful man and very, a real patrician. But he didn't know squat about the car industry. But he starts reading through the plan. Well, fortunately, halfway through, the Secretary of the Treasury said, well, wait a minute, that's enough. I'd like to know what your advisors think. So he went first to Salomon Brothers, and John Goodfriend, who was the CEO of Salomon Brothers, stood up and just trashed the company. Absolutely trashed it. It was horrible. And I sat there and listened to it. I thought, well, first of all, I think he's being too extreme. I believed there was a way out. It was draconian, but there was a way out. So when my turn came, I went through the story of what I thought they had to do. And at the end of the meeting, they thanked us, and we walked out. And I figured, that's it. And so Dick Dilworth came and saw me. He said, look, you got to continue on. We want you to help us get through this and all that. And I said, well, fine, but I have 3 conditions. And I don't know why I felt that I could tell this guy that I had 3 conditions, but anyway, I did. So I said, number 1, they fired Salomon Brothers instantly. They said to John Goodfriend, we never want to see you again. Well, the number 2 guy there for Salomon Brothers was Jim Wolfenson. Anybody here know what that name means? Yeah. He headed the World Bank most recently, and before that he had his own company, but he was one of the key partners of Salomon Brothers, a fantastic guy. And I said, rehire Salomon Brothers with Jim Wolfenson as the lead. Secondly, appoint Lee Iacocca CEO immediately. And third, Lee Iacocca has to call me personally, not secretaries, or he's got to personally call me to come and see him to talk about what we will do with him. Well, number 1 and 2 were really easy. Number 3 was very hard. Lee Iacocca hated consultants. He had a long history of never having hired a consultant, I think, in his life. And so for him to pick up the phone and call me was an act of, an unnatural act for him. So finally he did, because I had told Dick Dilworth every other day that I haven't gotten Lee's call. Oh, he's going to call. And I'm sure he got on the phone and called Iacocca and said, you got to call, because the Secretary of the Treasury isn't going to do anything for you until you get Booz Allen on board, which was a nice background to have for a consultant. That was good. So that followed with, we had a wonderful afternoon together in his home. He wouldn't have me in his office, in his home on a Saturday. And so nobody would know. But as a result of that, we did go to work, and we helped them through the process. We met with people from the White House, with the governor of Michigan, with congressmen. We made testimony before Congress. We had to, one of the odd side things here, we had to persuade Pete Peterson and Steve Schwarzman, names you probably know now because of Blackstone, but this was pre-Blackstone days, that they should not oppose the deal, because they were going to go on and testify against it to Congress. There were really three issues. One, could Chrysler survive? Was the company salvageable? Secondly, how much money was necessary in a bailout, under what conditions? And we wound up, we were responsible for doubling it to $1.5 billion. Think about that in today's terms. Where, what are we, $180 billion for AIG now? And finally, the third one was, what was the proper role of government? And those things are still at issue when any time the government does intervene. Well, the result was, as I think most people know, that they did get their loan guarantee. They did survive for a while, and for a while prospered. And frankly, I think the reason they got off track is they went back and got back into the defense business, and they got back into a lot of the things that we got them out of. They went and expanded their car lines again. The biggest battle we had was going from 3 body types or body shells to 2. There were huge economic differences in that, and they eventually got down to what they called a K car, and that was the basis on which they really survived. The results were great. They paid back 100% of the loans that were guaranteed. Government made several $100 million on their warrants. And an interesting sidelight is that several of the players went on to very successful business careers. Obviously, Iacocca became an icon and writing articles about becoming president of the United States. But Jerry Greenwald, who was the controller, wound up first as president of Chrysler, then as CEO of United Airlines. Steve Miller became really the guy for workouts of this kind. I think Steve has probably been CEO of at least a half a dozen companies that have gone through real trauma. And I think maybe Steve has presented here before. Yes, the answer is yes. Jim Wolfenson, who went on to become president, as I indicated, of the World Bank. John Day became president he was one of the executives there, became president of Bendix. And there were a number of other players that were involved who went on to very, very successful business careers. Matter of fact, when I read about them, I say now, and they all start off their resumes with, I saved Chrysler. Well, I know I didn't. Lee Iacocca did. The second big challenge that I want to go through with you is a battle I had as a director. I became a director of a company called MicroAge back in the middle 90s, and MicroAge was a redistributor of computer hardware and software, and it at that time was in Fortune 500. I think it had a $4 or $5 billion revenue level. But within 6 months of joining the board, I concluded that it was heading for very serious difficulty. It was losing market share. Its EBITDA was sharply declining. It was making no progress in selling a failing business, which was crucial to their recovery. And the outlook was simply growing bleaker and bleaker. And it wasn't because of the industry. The industry was doing fine, but the company was not. And I concluded that a change had to occur at the top, both in strategy as well as in people. So I took the unusual act of requesting a board meeting without the CEO, which we had, and I did my very best PowerPoint presentation on why the company was heading to bankruptcy, and thought that there would be simply no question that they'd all say, yes, let's see, what do we do about it? That wasn't what the reaction was. And the reason was that, and I didn't understand it as well going into the meeting as I did coming out, there were really two sets of directors. There were only 6 outside directors and one CEO, so there were 7 on the board, so there were 6 of us at that meeting. And 3 of them had been with the CEO through the long march. They had gone bankrupt once before, CEO got them saved, and off they went again, and now they were on their way back in, and they said, we got to follow, if you went with Mao Zedong through the long march, you stuck with him no matter what, and that's what they were doing. The other 3 were newer, meaning less than 5 years on the board, and they hadn't gone through all that, and they were scared because they realized what was happening to the company. Well, there were 3 options which we discussed. One was change the CEO, fire him. He was the founder, which is always tough. Secondly, appoint a chairman, not CEO, but a non-executive chairman over him. And third was continue as we are and just kind of tough it out and hope for the best. Well, it was clear to me that without change, we'd go bankrupt. So I had a choice of continuing to try to convince the loyalists to make a change or to leave. And frankly, I made the largest error in my entire career, and I did not resign, and the company did go bankrupt about 6 months later. I learned a terrible lesson, but it's one that sometime each one of you is going to have a similar kind of decision to make, and I strongly suggest you think hard and stand up and just leave if that's the only recourse you can have. I simply thought I could do more than I could do. I could not convince those other people to change, and I should have left. The third one that I will discuss is what I call saving a premier newspaper. I think you saw in my resume out there, and Alan related a bit of it. I took on a project with the Chicago Sun-Times. A little background, the Sun-Times was founded in 1941 by Marshall Field III, who was an icon in Chicago because of the department stores, to oppose the isolationist Colonel McCormick, who owned and ran the Tribune. And actually, the paper started on December 6th, 1941. And so the issue of isolationism became, moot the following day. The paper was sold several times between the mid-'80s and the mid-'90s. And then a Canadian, Conrad Black, took it over in about 1995. And bad things happened. He proceeded to siphon off several $100 million of the company's money. He produced gigantic tax liabilities, both in the United States and in Canada, through highly aggressive and creative structures for avoidance of tax. And a number of things happened as a result of that. Remember, there was a shareholder revolt, and they finally threw Conrad out in 2003. The market flattened in 2005 and began a downward plunge in 2006. I joined the board at the end of 2005 and was made CEO in November of 2006. Now, my friends all asked me, what in the hell are you thinking? Because I couldn't say I didn't understand because I'd been on the board for a year, so I understood this was a basket case. Well, I had my good training here, and I had a long time training at Booz Allen, so I could do anything, right? Well, maybe not. But my objective was a narrow one. It wasn't to turn this into a huge profit maker, because I knew that would be impossible, but was rather a safe landing for the Chicago Sun-Times and the neighborhood newspapers. This was extremely important to Chicago. This was, there were two. It's a two-newspaper town. It's one of the few left, and they present two very different views. They both hold the politicians' feet to the fire. It makes the city run better, and it makes our society run better. And so I, for non-economic reasons, was interested in maintaining the Sun-Times, even though, frankly, I had been a Tribune reader all of my days in Chicago. The Sun-Times was kind of the other newspaper. But I did see after a year on the board that this was an important part of the fabric of Chicago and what made it a great city. So the situation was frankly grim. It wasn't bad, it was grim. Cash flows were positive, but only marginally. We had a $600 million contingent tax liability to the Canadian government and another $600 million contingent tax liability to the U.S. government. And this is on a company that had $400 million of revenue. So you don't need your computers to figure that doesn't work. The market was falling, and it already, as I indicated, fell during my first year as a director. We had just gone through a disastrous reorganization, and I remember when the management came to the board and said what they were going to do, I said, do you have any concept of how difficult it is? They were going to transfer the sales force from selling kind of 4 inches of print to selling marketing solutions to their advertisers. Well, it's a good idea, but one day of training, which is what they planned for everybody, I said, you're asking something that's almost impossible. Well, in the process, they also ripped up all the relationships and kind of redistributed them. So it was a disaster. And finally, it was losing market share at about the rate of 3 to 5% a year. So you can't imagine a situation that was worse. I mean, Chiquita, as I look back on it, was a piece of cake compared to the Sun-Times. So what did we do? We put in a new management team, virtually entirely, had major cost reductions, wave one, wave two. We were able to reverse the market share loss and turn it into a gain. We put major investments into new media because we thought that was the way out. And everything with an idea of keeping the core capabilities, which means the newsroom, in place for the future. What happened? Well, on the way to the play, Mrs. Lincoln. In 2006, the market, that's both locally and nationally for advertising, and newspaper advertising is about 80% of the revenue of a newspaper. And I think that's the case in most print publications. So it fell 6% in 06, it fell 10% in 07, 19% in 08, and almost 30% in 09. Now, think of how many companies could survive that. And the answer is not very damn many. So what has happened? Well, we've lost, I don't know how many companies have gone, a lot of them have gone bankrupt that haven't folded. They've gone bankrupt to reorganize, but about 12 of them have folded, 12 major newspapers in the United States. More will follow. What did we do? We cut costs by about 40%, headcount by about 50%, did a huge amount of outsourcing. We did resolve the Canadian tax liability, which took one $600 million problem away, and we made a settlement for $40 million. That was great. And somebody said, well, good, you did it with the U.S., with Canadians, let's do it with the U.S. government. Well, I said, I don't think it's going to work quite like that, and it certainly hadn't. We did get some recovery from some of the managers that were there before, but very little. Conrad Black and his colleagues have been sentenced to prison. Conrad is currently a guest of the government just outside of Miami. As I indicated, we did reverse the market share loss and turned it into a gain over the last, well, it took us about 6 months to do it, but we did it, and we're delighted, and it was going well. Matter of fact, the circulation declined, we arrested that, and that's about flat. But nonetheless, the cash was still going out the door, and we had gone into cash flow negative, and we lost a couple of suits that required cash. So the only way to solve the problem, and it's one that I began working on before I left, was to sell the paper through bankruptcy. And because that way the government debt, the IRS liability, stays with the parent. The assets are sold, the newspapers are sold as assets below it. And so we did that. The newspaper is surviving. The company that I own 700,000 shares of is absolutely zero. And so the Sun Time lives on, which was my objective in that whole, for going there. Let me tell you just a couple of things before questions, and that's what I want to spend the rest of our time on. Somebody asked me earlier, we had a discussion, kind of what, kind of give advice to the guys. I said, well, I can't give advice to, some group like this who has as diverse backgrounds and diverse interests and all that. But I'll tell you what I learned in my career, and I'll give you three because that's the way I always think. The first is the word understanding, and I can't impress on you how important that is. My view is that the person that understands the best in any situation, but let's take business now is our topic, has a clear competitive advantage over anybody else. What are the best tools for understanding? And the difference between knowledge and understanding is knowledge is kind of, you got a whole bunch of facts. Understanding is knowing why, understanding what the causes are, understanding deeply how it happened or the way out. The best tools, number one, unquestionably, is listening. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that, and that's one of the things I learned here, but I learned it even more when I was with Booz Allen, because the primary tool of a consultant is to listen well. And when I say listen well, I don't mean just take down the notes. I mean understand what they're talking about and why, and understand their motivations, understand the difference between what they're saying and what they're thinking. So number one is listening, and number two is very aggressive fact-finding. And I think that second skill you're going to walk out of here with in spades. The first skill is a more difficult one. Major point number two that I learned were Lone Rangers get blindsided or worse. I learned very early in my career that despite the fact I could do anything better than anybody else, if I tried to do that, I'd fail. And building a strong team, and the longer you are in business and the higher you go, the more important you'll find it is absolutely essential. And operating it openly is probably even as important. So it isn't just good enough to get a lot of really good people around you. It's to operate openly so that everybody has both the right and the responsibility to speak their mind as they see it, not as you think it. And I have just a twist on the old song about people that Barbra Streisand used to sing. People who need people are the smartest people in the world. And the third one is leaders need a strong ethical rudder. Science is confirming that the power of the emotional side of our brains. We all know, and here, of course, we learn analytical thinking in spades. But we have countless situations in our lives where we see that people don't behave that way. They do things that are not obviously a product of logical reason. They do it for some other reason. But to them, those other reasons are important, even though they may not understand it. And it's this emotional brain and the analytical brain. And David Brooks of the New York Times is writing a book on it. I would recommend, when he gets it done, that we all read it. This sort of other brain drives inexplicably courageous behavior. Think the first responders in 9/11. Why would you go in that building? Everything would tell you, don't do that. You might die. But they did it. It also allows inexplicably bad behavior. When you think about Tiger Woods, why in earth would he do what he did if he was thinking it all straight? And so this side of our brain is extraordinarily powerful, and we need to understand that. And frankly, we need to discipline it. We need to think how to get our brain to respond as we want it to, because it's very, there is a subconscious element here of discipline that's required and training that's required that is necessary. And so both in our ability to understand what others are thinking and doing and why they are, as well as our own behavior, we need to control and have what I think of as a very strong ethical rudder, so that when no one's looking, we do the right thing. And with that, I will open it up for questions, and thank you very much for inviting me here. We have a question in the back.
Yeah, what do you see as the way out for newspapers? Do you think there is one? I mean, I'm a former reporter, and I wonder if it's more an issue of relevancy, of at least the mode of delivery.
Well, I unfortunately, as I went into this, I said, there is not a problem on earth that I can't solve. There was a level of arrogance that I approached this. Otherwise, I probably never would have done it. If I had any humility in me at all, I would have said, give that job to somebody else. But we tried a number of things. Now, the obvious answer is get paid for your content in other channels. And as you probably know, if you say you were a reporter, yeah, that everybody's trying to do that. The New York Times, certainly a lot more powerful than any other paper, with maybe now the exception of the Wall Street Journal, has backed away from it. Wall Street Journal is going at it, in an interesting way. If you have content that you can protect, that is proprietary, you can probably get paid for it. And the Journal now has got these several things there, all the political commentary, all the economic commentary, the business commentary, and they're packaging them and giving it to you on a daily basis for a fee. Now, there have been many other attempts of newspapers to try to do that. None are successful. Now, the question is, what happens to the newsroom as a result of this? And my view is the newsroom is going to continue to shrink. And the newsroom is owned by print media, newspapers, magazines. They're the only ones that have editors and reporters in any number that can do investigative reporting and kind of first-line journalism. The only ones. And when they go away, the question is, where's the defense for our democracy? What happens if the fourth estate evaporates? What happens? And I don't have the answer. I really don't. And I'm involved with one internet company that's trying to raise money so it can hire investigative reporters. And there's lots of, you've got all of them around. You can hire whoever you want practically now. But it's charitable money. And that's only available for a little while. So I don't think that's the answer. I don't know what the answer is right now, but I do know what the danger is, and it's to our not just to newspapers and magazines. I think the danger to our society is huge. Yes, sir.
You've served on several private boards and public boards. Can you just highlight some of the differences you found on the difference between the two, and some thoughts on that?
Well, the differences have become very stark since Sarbanes-Oxley, and which is what might be one of the worst pieces of legislation to create problems, more problems than it solved. And the amount of money that companies are spending to meet the requirements of Sarbanes-Oxley without, in my view, having much benefit at all. Secondly, there are the disclosure rules that not just Sarbanes-Oxley, but generally with the SEC disclosure rules are hugely different between the two. There are none virtually with private companies. You can say whatever you want, and publicly or privately. Whereas in public boards, you really have to be very, very careful, or you'll be sued. And you're probably going to get sued anyway. I'm on a board right now, the Allegheny Energy. We just announced to sell the company. We got a 30+% premium, and the stock price has fallen because the other company's stock fell. And when you do a stock for stock, that happens. We got probably 10 lawsuits. That happens with public boards, not for private boards. And most of my friends would strongly prefer to stay private if they possibly could. Now, the advantage of going public, obviously, is equity markets, and that's why companies do it. Well, plus they want to cash out. But there are very big differences between the two. Come on. There you go.
You could revisit your business school days a little bit and revisit
Well, I'd play more. No. Yeah, right. I was married at the time, so, and with a little baby. Matter of fact, I tell my daughter, who's just had 3 kids over the last year and a half, but she came to class with me. My wife was away for a couple of weeks one time, and so the buggy right, into the classroom. So she participated in my degree. I wouldn't change much. I think I got about as much out of it as I could have. I had an assistantship in my first year with Hal Levitt, who was just a magnificent guy in the behavioral sciences arena and organization, and then Leland Hazard, as I mentioned. And I don't. Do you have a program like Leland Hazard's now? It was kind of a great book's look at business. It was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. It was, I'd say, almost everyone in the class, if they say what was the most valuable course you had, it was that one, because it was a course kind of on life. It was really good. And we had the management game, and I had Herb Simon as my chairman, which was an experience I will never forget. I mean, he had the ability to walk into the room not having any briefing on what, of course, he's briefed on the world and everything, but and he would always ask the question that I hadn't thought about, which was infuriating, but very instructive. Yeah. But I loved my time here. It was really good. I worked my butt off. It was terrible. Yes. Come on. We still have plenty of time.
We got time for one more, actually. Yeah. You mentioned in your talk about your second challenge as director of microwave that in hindsight you wish you would have stepped out, you wish you would have left the situation rather than staying in and making all the investment to figure it out. How do you distinguish that situation from the challenges you faced at Chiquita Banana?
Yeah. Well, the Chiquita was never hopeless. No. When I said I should have left in protest. That's the reason. I should have left to tell the board, you are making a terrible, terrible mistake, and you're violating your fiduciary responsibility by not acting in this situation. Instead, by remaining silent and staying there, I was, it turned out basically an enabler of what happened, and that was wrong. That was wrong. And as I indicated, it was the one thing in my career I would like to have a mulligan on that one. On Chiquita, I came in when the company was coming out of bankruptcy, and their problems were serious across a whole range of things. They had too much debt. They had the profitability was too low. They had some very serious problems with social, environmental stuff in their. There were just problems across the board. But my sense there was, number one, it was an industry which was going to survive, and it was stable. Bananas were, interestingly, and still are, the highest consumed fruit in the world. In places like India. Do we have anybody that lived in India? Oh my God, half the country. Yeah. Well. You know how important bananas are in India. Now Chiquita wasn't there, and I tried very hard to figure out a way that we could get in there and help and support them. China, very big, and so and in Africa it's probably the basic substance. And so I knew that with something that was that popular, if we could figure a way around. And so we did across the board. Everything I learned at Booz Allen, I was able to apply. We changed the distribution, we changed everything. And it worked. We got rid of our debt, and the company did very well for a while. And then after I left, they bought something and paid a little bit too much for it and wound up with a spinach problem. They bought the Fresh Express, and about 6 months after they bought it, there was that big salmonella thing with spinach, and it just really took them down. But they're coming back. They'll be there long term, And I think we put the foundation in there for that. But that was, Micro-Age was going out of business if we didn't do something. And we didn't, and they went out. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. God bless you. Good luck to you. You've got a whole world of opportunity out there. It seems dark as hell right now, and it is, by the way. But, but it won't be that way for long. And while it might be a little tough to get your feet on the first job, the best will rise to the top, and you'll have great careers. I couldn't have imagined having the kind of fun that I've had throughout these last 50 years. And I thank a lot of it to what I learned here. So thank you very much.